In this video, we are going to learn how Selenium WebDriver works. Don't worry, I am not going to tell you how to write the Selenium test in this video, but we will learn what really happens behind the scene. We are also going to see how you can perform the actions on the browser with the help of Postman. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Keep watching. When we go to the Selenium website, it says that it officially provides support in many programming languages, and you can write your test in many different programming languages. And those who have actually written Selenium WebDriver test using multiple programming languages, they for sure know that there is one thing which remains common irrespective of used programming language, and that is WebDriver. Or specifically I say it's the browser's WebDriver. And this WebDriver is basically the one which performs the actions on the browser. And when we discuss about the architecture, you will be able to understand why we use different WebDriver for each of the browser. When you understand the basic architecture, then you will be able to understand more about the Selenium standalone server or the Selenium server, and that can basically help you to understand or visualize the remote WebDriver, Selenium grid, or the cloud execution. Let's talk about the Selenium WebDriver architecture. And first, we will talk about it in the context of local machine execution. When I say local machine execution, I mean following components should be on the same machine: test code and Selenium libraries, browser specific WebDriver. In our discussion, we will talk about Chrome WebDriver, but basically the similar logic apply to all other WebDrivers. And the third one is browser, in which your application will open for testing. One very important thing to note here is that WebDriver and browser always needs to be on the same machine, irrespective of local machine execution, remote execution, or execution in grid. Here I am taking a very simple Java based example to explain how Selenium WebDriver works. You may be writing your test using complex frameworks, but underneath it is going to run same way as I am going to explain. You write your test with the help of methods which are provided by Selenium libraries. Now let's see what happens behind the scene when each of these steps execute. When the first step executes, it basically does two things. First, it will launch the WebDriver. I am assuming here that WebDriver is present on your local machine and the path to WebDriver is known to your test program. WebDriver basically started as a server. Carefully look at the WebDriver. It has opened a port and listening on that port. Now the second thing done by this step is to send a post REST request via HTTP protocol on the port on which WebDriver is listening. And this post request basically contains all the information of capabilities that we need browser to open with. And here comes the answer why WebDriver and browser needs to be on the same machine. If you look at the interaction between WebDriver and browser, it is not based on REST request, but instead WebDriver talks to browser natively. It basically means through its DLL or APIs. Let's see what happens when step 2 executes. In this step, test sends a request to navigate to URL https www.youtube/@smartqe, and this request is sent as post REST request on the port WebDriver is listening, and then WebDriver interacts with the browser to navigate to the URL via its native interaction. In the same way as navigating to URL, Selenium test performs other actions like finding the element or performing actions on the element by sending a REST request to the WebDriver. Now let's see what happens in step 3. When driver.quit method is called, first browser will be closed by the WebDriver, and then WebDriver itself will be terminated. Now let's see how Selenium works during remote or grid execution. Before we start test execution, we need to make sure Selenium server is running to handle the remote execution request or the grid execution request. In the shown picture, Selenium server is running in grid configuration. If you look at the code carefully, you will realize that I am not creating instance of Chrome driver, but instead I am creating instance of remote WebDriver and passing it a parameter which specifies the desired capabilities, which means on which browser we want to run our test. Let's see what actions are performed when we run our test. First step, which creates instance of WebDriver, will send a REST request to the hub URL which we have specified while creating the WebDriver instance. Based on the specified desired capabilities, it will forward that request to the qualifying node, and then node will launch the WebDriver and open the browser. Please keep in mind, node which is running Selenium server interacts with WebDriver using REST request, and WebDriver interacts with browser natively. Step number 2. Navigate to URL. Test will send REST request to hub. Hub now knows to which session this request belongs and forward the request to the correct node. Node, which is running Selenium server, sends another request to the WebDriver, and WebDriver natively interacts with the browser and opens the URL. Step number 3, which is to quit the driver. Once again, your test will send REST request to hub, and then hub, based on session details, will forward the request to node, and the node will forward this request to WebDriver on its port, and then WebDriver will natively interact with the browser to close it, and then WebDriver itself terminates. Now it's time to look at the demo where we will perform actions on the browser using the Postman. You can use any other tool which is capable of sending the request over the HTTP. During our architecture discussion, we saw that the WebDriver runs as a server and listens on a port, and the Selenium WebDriver libraries basically sends the request on that port, and WebDriver natively performs action onto the browser. The request which is sent to the WebDriver is basically on the JSON wire protocol, but for the simplicity, I have always calling it the REST. If you want to read more about the JSON wire protocol, then the link to the page I will provide in the description section. I have already downloaded Chrome driver. If you have not, the link is provided in the description section. Please make sure you download the right version. I can start Chrome driver by simply doing double click on it, or I can start it by opening a terminal window and typing the command. Running Chrome driver from the terminal window provides you the option to configure it. When you don't specify any port number in command, Chrome driver will run on the default port 9515. You can notice that Chrome driver is running on port 9515. Let's take a few examples of how requests are sent from the Postman and WebDriver performs the actions on the browser. All the endpoints which I am going to call in this video, or all the endpoints which are called by your test via the Selenium libraries, are available under the JSON wire protocol specification, and link to the endpoints where JSON wire protocol specification is provided is in the description section. Let's see some of the steps in action now. From my Postman, I will send a post request, and body of this request contains the desired capabilities details. When I will click send button, a request will be sent to WebDriver port 9515 and will launch web browser. Once browser is launched, it's time to navigate to the URL. Let's go to our second request, which is navigating to the URL. When I click on the send button, a request will be sent to the WebDriver, and it will forward that request to the browser, and the browser will navigate to the URL of the Smart QE channel on the YouTube. After opening the browser and navigating to URL, it's time to perform actions on the element. But before we perform action on the element, first we need to find those elements. Let's see how that is done. My third request is to find a subscribe button. Let's send the request to see if there is an element having ID property value as subscribe button. You can see my request was successful, which means an element subscribe button is present. Let's do the final action in this video. That is, perform the click action on the subscribe element. Let's click on the send button on Postman and see subscribe button is clicked. I hope this video was useful. Thank you for watching.